If you are late arriving into the room, you are very welcome to the second day of Disability and Rights, the Possibilities and Limitations of Rights Discourses under Neoliberalism. Again, we would like to remind participants that closed captions and BSL interpretation are available to you and can be accessed in the bottom bar of your Zoom screen, or if you can't see the options there, simply click on the More button. So 3 little dots and a sign that says More, click on that and you should be able to see options to turn on the interpretation or the closed captions. We have been blessed with lots of excellent questions for all of the speakers over the last couple of days, but we do ask participants to write their questions and send them either via the Q&A function or as a direct message to the chair, in this case, myself, Luke Beasley. If for some reason you can't use the chat to pose a question, we will accept a limited number of spoken questions that can be, you can signal that you'd like to ask a question verbally by either raising your hand or turning your camera off and trying to move around a little bit so that you catch my eye. But again, please do only do this if you really can't use the Q&A function or the chat. Okay, with no further ado, I would like to move us on to the second session. This session touches on a number of things which have come up throughout the presentations over the last day or so. Many of us are coming from a background where we're working in education, either higher or school-age education. And many of us have had to grapple with the problems posed by globalization, imperialism, and uneven development as we've gone along. This session, hopefully, will allow us to delve deeper into those questions and is entitled Reifying Rights in the Classroom, Inclusion, Exclusion, and Assimilation Within Education. As we go into this session, we are asking ourselves, what are the major barriers preventing disabled students and children from flourishing in the way that their peers are able to? How might disabled students and disabled teachers reappropriate the infrastructure available in education to push for the realization of their rights? And further, what fictitious and damaging reappropriations of rights are being presented to us by current forms of educational management, segregated schooling, and exclusion? Our primary speaker for this session will be Anna Vanya, and Anna is a graduate student in gender studies at the Central European University in Budapest with a background in special education in Hungary. Her experiences in segregative and integrative classrooms made her increasingly critical of both the education system for disabled students and the prevailing frameworks in Hungarian disability studies. This led her to pursue a more critical, interdisciplinary approach through feminist, queer, and Marxist theory. Anna's current research focuses on the racialization of disability, educational segregation, and the limits of rights-based advocacy in post-socialist contexts. And Anna's presentation today is entitled Racialized Constructions of Disability and Educational Segregation in Post-Socialist Hungary. Anna, thank you very much, and I invite you to take it away from here.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'm about to share my screen. Can you see it right?
It's just popped up for us now.
Okay. Yeah, so. Okay, so my presentation is indeed titled The Racialization of Disability and Educational Segregation in Hungary. And so this was my thesis project, and I will shortly explore the intersection of disability, racialization, and educational segregation in Hungary. And just to give you a short overview of what I'm actually going to talk about. So basically my presentation will be structured around 2 court cases. One is titled named Horváth and Kiss versus Hungary, and this is a case from the European Court of Human Rights. And the second one is Gyöngyöspata. It's a small town in Hungary, and it was a heavily publicized case. And yeah, so the reason that I chose this case is, or I thought that they would that they will allow me to look into how disability is racialized in different ways, and then what are the changing mechanism in educational segregation, because there are time differences between the cases. And then also also, for example, the Strasbourg case it was one of the most accessible case, and it was also one where they really underlined the context and how rights-based advocacy work there. Yeah, so just to shortly explain. So basically, what started this research, or what was interested in me, that so I studied special education in Hungary before, and so in the Hungarian special education system, or special needs school, under the category of mild intellectual disability, Romani students are very much overrepresented, and they are taught in a segregated manner. And overall, like, the Hungarian education system is a very segregated one. And so this was sort of what made me explore this question, because I noticed that this topic is quite absent in disability studies scholarship in Hungary, or even just in special education journals, or just basically throughout my studies. And so my research question basically was, how has the concept of intellectual disability been racialized and employed as a tool to segregate Romani students in Hungary? And so I already mentioned I will look into court cases, which I think will also fit well to the topic of this conference. So one of them is from 2013, and the other one is from 2020. Yes, so just I wanted to quickly give a little bit of context, and I try to keep it as simple as possible. So basically, as I mentioned, the educational segregation of Romani students in Hungary is a very long-standing issue. So this is nothing a new phenomenon. This has been going on, although the mechanism might have changed as the political system changed as well. But this is a very serious concern. And so basically, throughout my presentation, I will show that there are different methods for desegregation to manifest. So, for example, the one that I already mentioned is this systematic placement in segregated special needs school, which means that the Roma children are often classified or diagnosed as having special needs, specifically under the category of mild intellectual disability, and they're placed in segregated schools or classes. And what is interesting that Romani students are highly overrepresented in this category of mild intellectual disability, but at the same time, they are also very underrepresented in other categories such as autism or ADHD or sort of and physical disabilities and so on. And the other mechanism of segregation is the emergence of Roma majority schools, which means that there are schools where where Roma students are the majority or the large portion of the student population, and these schools are known to offer lower quality of education. And what happens in both cases, so either they are placed in special needs school or in these Roma majority schools, that due to this lower quality of education, it forecloses the possibility of social mobility or any further studies. They're not, most of the time, they're not able to do the school leaving certificates in Hungary, which is needed to go to university, or even it's just needed to start a professional training, and so on. So also another context, because I'm presenting court cases, and these both of the cases are represented by Romani rights NGOs, namely the European Roma Rights Center and the Chance for Disadvantaged Children Foundation. And so these NGOs are known to challenge the segregation, and they often use strategic litigation to do so. Both of these NGOs that I mentioned are financed or were part of the framework of Open Society Foundation, which is the foundation of billionaire George Soros. And so they both have sort of a US based funding and donors. And so they emerged in the region after the neoliberal transition, like neoliberal transformation of Hungary, its transformation from state socialism to neoliberal capitalism, and they sort of brought a lot of American lawyers with them, and so on. And what is important to understand about these NGOs or about the sort of, because they created the backbone of what is called sometimes in the literature of Romani rights movement in Hungary, that they emerged at the time of neoliberal policy consensus in post-socialist Europe. And so this also meant that there was the sort of marketization of human rights through the emergence of human rights entrepreneurs and so on. And but what has been noted in specifically about the work of these NGOs, that there is this power imbalance between the usually non-Roma lawyers and the Roma clients, because, as I mentioned, their main methods is strategic litigation, and they usually try to find sort of clients for their cases. Yes, and also this sort of this method of strategic litigation was brought here by the work of these NGOs, and they rely on the work of previous strategic litigation that were happening in the United States around educational segregation. And as I read through some interviews with some lawyers who work in this foundation, it was also sort of like an American lawyers who joined their team in Hungary, who suggested them to try out the methods of litigation and so. So the first case is Horváth and Kish versus Hungary, and so this case was represented by lawyers of the European Roma Rights Center at the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. And so the applicants are two young Romani men who were diagnosed with having mild intellectual disability in the Hungarian education system, and so they were placed in segregated special needs school, and this prevented them to further study or to further obtain this school leaving certificate, and yeah, it withheld the possibility of any sort of social mobility. And in the end, the court ruled in the favor of applicants, which they sort of recognized that this, which they kind of mentioned that there was a systemic misdiagnosis which led to ethnic discrimination. And what I find really interesting about this case, this is kind of the main case regarding Hungary when they when they sort of made it explicit that in the Hungarian education system the rights of students are violated, that they framed this issue as sort of the misuse of diagnostic categories. So what was often mentioned during the litigation, that these sort of categories should only be reserved for students who are like actually disabled. And the main problem is that the methods or like the assessment tests are biased. So we need to create a sort of standardized version of them and need to make sure that there are less place for biases in them. But in the end, it doesn't really went beyond or to sort of already questions that, okay, but why are many like disabled students are already in a segregated school? So it weren't really questioning like segregation per se, because it said that like these schools are, there's nothing wrong with them, they just should be reserved for those who have like organic disability. This is the term they use. And so sort of that they argued that disability should be recognized through a medicalized and neutral lens. And like obviously this is was like a strategic litigation, and also for the two young men, it was also important that they had to prove that they were not disabled in order to prove that their placement was wrong. And so I'm not arguing about their strategy, but I am very, this made me very I'm interested in how this sort of plays out at the court, because I think for me, who previously studied like disability studies, this sort of notion of like organic disability and disability should only be understood through like a biological or medical lens was a bit like made me question several things. So I was interested to look into it further. And in the court, they argued that that this like continuous misplacement of Romani children is largely linked to this concept of familial intellectual disability in Hungary, and which is a distinct category from pathological intellectual disability. And what I found here, or what was interesting, that for instance, earlier from this case, there was another application to the European Court of Human Rights from Czech Republic, when they also mentioned that in the region of like post-socialist Eastern Europe, there is like a different, there was like some different conceptualization of disability, and it lacked some sort of clear definition, and it was more intertwined with the social world. And so when I look into it more, I found that in the field of like Soviet defectology, which was really influential in the region during state socialism. So basically, like defectologists were the ones who would, for example, work in special education or work with the concept of disability, and they sort of relied on a more relational or environmental model of disability, when they sort of argued that they kind of argued that there is like two interconnected dimension of disability. Like one is the sort of impairment, and the other one is the other one is because of the lack of integration to the social world. And what was very clear in their work, that they sort of had this vision of like the deviant children, and which was very largely connected to the like racialization of Roma families and Roma communities. So they sort of had this vision that, or or in the work of several defectologists, that is mentioned that Roma culture is what is creating these inadequate environment for education. So this was kind of used to justify like forced sterilization of Romani women, because they were seen as like not capable mothers, whereas in comparison to the like white Czech or Hungarian or Slovak women, and also the sort of the institutionalization of children, of like taking them away from the families. And yes, that also it has this like vision that these like lower abilities are linked to this an advocate cultural and social environment. And so we can really see that here, like during state socialism period, like the concept of disability, especially intellectual disability, was heavily intertwined with racialization of Romani people. And particularly about this concept of familial intellectual disability, it can be linked back to the 1970s, to the so-called Budapest Review, and where a psychologist and a genetic doctor, they were conducting sort of review about the nature of intellectual disability, and they visited this like special needs school all over Budapest. And what they found that, yes, like indeed, Romani children were overrepresented here. And they even sort of argued that some of the children might not have, if they kind of looking into their tests of like IQ or so on, like they might not would classify as having intellectual disability, but they sort of created this category of familial disability to kind of make sense of the overrepresentation, and this is attributed to the social and environmental factors, and such as parental education and economic status. And so in the case that I was analyzing, the applicant argued that this concept in particular is sort of like also can be linked to this like misjudgment of abilities and the placement in special education. And to me, this was something that was really like it made me think so much, because so in one hand they were arguing that this sort of concept of familial disability and this more like social relational understanding of intellectual disability is leading to discrimination. So what we need to do in order to like fix this issue is to sort of only consider like organic or reasons for intellectual disability, and to really keep in mind like a threshold of IQ for intellectual disability, which is standardized by the World Health Organization, and also the standardization of assessment methods, and so like while the case was one, like I was also wondering that this sort of logic, and this was not just in this case, but before that there was also a policy specifically targeting this issue in Hungary. It kind of reinforced this binary of like disabled and non-disabled on medical and organic grounds. And I noticed that there is a lot of attention here, because on the one hand, from like a disability studies perspective or disability rights, like this sort of medicalization, or like claiming that there's this like organic disabilities is not something that the field is was trying to overcome, but at the same time from the other perspective, this very concept of disability has been used to justify exclusion of racialized communities. So I was really thinking through of how can we sort of resolve this tension, because as I mentioned, this issue is very much not explored in Hungarian disability studies, scholarship, and so on. And I can sort of understand, because there's this tension there that it's very hard to grasp. And I was really interested to see what happens if we sort of try to apply a sort of Kripov color critique, which would be the work of Jasbir Puar, for example, or how would or they would also call it decolonial disability studies, where we are sort of trying to move disability from a noun to verb, and we are it kind of forces us to engage more the concept of state violence and systems of oppression that are making racialized population available for the maiming by the state. This is the term that, for instance, Jasbir Puar used in her book, The Right to Maim. And in that book, she also introduces the concept of debilitation, which she kind of understands to sort of disrupt this binary of the disabled and non-disabled, and it's developed in the context of Palestine and the sort of the settler colonial context, that certain population are made available for maiming, and then this systematic injury to a population, it's also in a sense not even recognized as disability in this neoliberal inclusionary framework, and this is precisely that this not recognition of disability that leads to this debilitation as well. And maybe to give another example that helped me understand her concept was that she described that in the an event in the United States, when in one part of the city there was a disability pride or disability pride march, and the other part of the city there was the Black Lives Matter movement. And so she was sort of interested to see that in the Black Lives Matter movement, when they were protesting against police violence that has its maiming effect and disabling effects, how is it not really understood as sort of disability through this framework of disability identity and pride and empowerment? So there's this so there is this this framework of liberal disability framework, which is more concerned with identity and pride, is not really able to sort of do much with this systemic harm done to racialized communities. And I really found it important here in my topic, because for example, the field of disability studies in Hungary, or disability rights advocacy in Hungary, is also very much influenced by the US context, because after the fall of socialism, a lot of disability NGOs or advocacy was sort of inspired by the United States, and even the field itself is relying on concepts from there. And I just found that also these framework are not really help us move forward from this or this tackle this racialization of disability, or like help us undo this like racialized harm that were done in this like disability conceptualization during state socialism. But at the same time, there is there is something to be done here, because we also like need to understand that that there is like a difference, understanding a different relation to the concept of disability in racialized and impoverished communities than the like whiter upper class population. And also, I find it like really important to start this conversation, because this sort of like racialized harm is not really addressed, not just in disability studies in Hungary, but in a lot of scholarship, just because the region of like Eastern Europe is kind of seen as this region of like outside of race, or outside of colonial power structures. And so this is something that is like really hard, or like not really, like this idea of racialization is not really taken as an analytic concept to discuss like power hierarchies in the region. And I think there's but this is so much there, and it's really visible, especially in the case of like Romani families and Romani communities. And this is something that I think like the disability studies scholarship like really urgently needs to consider, and like really like needed to move forward. And the other case that I want to discuss is Gyöngyöspata. So this is a smaller town in northeastern Hungary. Like you can see it kind of in the map that I put it there. So this is yeah, like it's a smaller town, and which has like a larger Romani population. And this town was part of a winemaking region during state socialism, but after the fall of socialism and the neoliberal transformation, a lot of the job opportunities that were in the town has shrinkened, and in unemployment rate rose, and especially in the Romani community. So unemployment rate is very high among the Romani community in this small town, which is not just a small town, but I think it could be said overall in Eastern Europe, that after the neoliberal transformation, the unemployment rate has been risen. And so this segregation is explores like a different mechanism, which is the sort of emergence of like Roma only school. And this the emergence of Roma only school, I understand it in the context of, again, the neoliberal transformation, because this can be kind of linked to the policy of like free choice of school, which is very interesting here, because this policy that like you are like able to choose freely of like which primary school you want to go, is like criticized so much worldwide. But in Hungary, there's a sort of like consensus around this policy, like among the political spectrum, that this is something that even through changes of government, like nobody really like touched. And this was also not really debated among like educational like policymakers and so on. And the reason for that could be understood that because this policy is also like a symbolic one, or like was seen as a symbolic one, because this is sort of like symbolized the sort of like loosening of like socialist system, and the sort of joining the free and the democratic world. So I said like there is this sort of this effective attachment to this sort of neoliberal policies here, and there's this sort of as some scholar would say, like there's this cruel optimism towards these policies, which that there's this like there's this vision or desire that this is going to help us bring the like free and democratic world, but in the end, this is actually something that's going to cost us a lot, and this is actually something that's going to uh, um, come back and further escalate inequalities. And so, like, yeah, in Hungary, this is what exactly happened, that this sort of led to this like emergence of like Roma only schools in town. So there is like a Roma only school, like Roma majority school, which is offering like lower quality of education, and then there is also the majority school, like the which is obviously has like better equipment, and students are able to graduate from their opt-in certificate and so on. And so in the town, the court ruled that like Roma pupils had been unlawfully segregated in the primary school of Gyöngyöspata, and so financial compensation was ordered for them. And this was also, this litigation was led by the Chance for Disadvantaged Children Foundation, also an NGO affiliated with the Open Society organization. And after the sort of the court ruled that this was like an unlawful segregation, there is a huge response from the current government of Hungary, which could be understood as like a far-right populist government. And they were sort of, so for example, the Prime Minister Orbán Viktor said that this decision to provide money or compensation for nothing, for not is offends people's sense of justice. And then he kind of rolled this line between the like respectable poor, like the white Hungarians in this village who work hard, and then the sort of the Romani communities who just like receive nothing, receive money for nothing. And then this this sort of like this sort of like deep stereotype of like the Romani communities and those who do not want to work, or like who avoid work and so on. And also what was what also needs to be mentioned, that they also sort of portrayed this litigation as this is like a money-making mission from the like Soros NGOs. And so there was like the vilification of both the like Romani community and then both the NGOs. And sort of the what's interesting, that sort of the NGOs were shown as the part of this like liberal left elite that are coming from the West to like interfere or like national order, and they are creating a tension here where previously there was peace. And yeah, I also just think this is something that also like needs to be considered, that these sort of like that this is kind of resonate, that this is kind of a popular stance in Hungary. And then I think this is also something that needs to be considered, that in this like region of not just Hungary, but in more broadly like the post-socialist Eastern Europe, like what sort of tensions or what sort of issues are behind that these sentiments towards the like failure of like liberal elite makes it so popular. Like, I think this can also be traced back to this sort of cruel optimism of the neoliberal transformation, that there is something there that people feel that, and then sort of these NGOs can represent the sort of elite there that play the part in this transformation. And then afterwards, because so afterwards, what the sort of Fidesz, the government, the governing party in Hungary, proposed for this segregation to end was the introduction of school police, which is that there are like police officers in schools in order to prevent like aggression within the schools. And so this was kind of, I see that this was kind of like I guess a response of the mayor of Göngyös also, who said that um, these segregation of Romani students were also necessary because some of the students were like how they were segregated in different classes within the school, and they were segregated spatially, so they were using like a different floor than the non-Roma kids. And the school director and the mayor argued that this is necessary because if you don't do it, then all the like non-Roma white kids will go to another town for school. And so they did this to sort of prevent this white flight. And then sort of the government response to sort of tackle this emergence of Roma only school is that they see it in as the response of like school police, that they can who are allowed to use physical aggression towards students. And so to me, this case was also just very much portrayed that there is this limitation to this strategic litigation that were employed so much in the movement, because like right now, like what happened, that the like Roma community in Göngyös was so much like on the news, and there was so much aggression towards them, and then and also towards the NGOs. But then afterwards, the NGOs they don't operate anymore in Hungary because of the unstable political environment. So they were sort of able to leave, but the tension within the communities and then are remaining there. And I think this sort of like power imbalances like now really visible, that this sort of judgment might not, like it might not it further sort of like racialized and isolated the community in the town. And now I'm also saying that this is also because within this context of the far right populism, that these sort of methods are for advocacy are even less effective. And yeah, so there's this sort of need, especially now, to sort of like rethink our advocacy options beyond these NGOs, because right now in Hungary there are also some talks of the foreign agent laws, that these NGOs are also for like other NGOs, and like these ones that I mentioned here, they're not operating in Hungary anymore, but other NGOs that they're under threat. And then I think, if I'm trying to be optimistic, this is also sort of like sort of something that we need to think about, to imagine sort of advocacy beyond the scope of NGOs, because in the last decades in Hungary, like most advocacy were always like tied to NGOs, like not just Romani advocacy, but like queer advocacy and so on. So this is now something that we need to like think about, like what is beyond, or what else is there.
Anna, could I just ask
Yes.
you to sum up in the next couple of minutes, please?
Okay. So actually, this is my conclusion. So I just wanted to conclude this very quickly, that there is this thing that I highlighted, that this strategic litigation that happened in Hungary by the NGOs were often like elite driven, and they were also sort of NGOs were responsible more towards their American donors rather than to the local community. And then why there is this exposure to injustice, there is the sort of like resistant to structural change in Hungary. And then also, I think the most important thing, that there is this need in Hungary, or like in Eastern Europe, the coalition between like disability justice and scholarship and the Romani rights movements. And we have this like responsibility to like really consider these experiences. and how they might relate to this concept of even like disability disabling differently. That and which is not which is not, we are not able to articulate if we are relying on sort of like a liberal framework of disability rights and so on. So thank you very much. This would be the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Anna. Very much appreciated indeed. We have got a few questions through for you. Some of them are, I guess I would say, political questions about the balance of forces in the Hungarian context, and some of them are legal questions. They're quite in-depth regarding the court cases. So I'm going to try and cycle between the two. I hope that's okay.
Okay.
So the first question we have in is someone wondering what the state of an anti-racist and anti-disablist movement in Hungary is, and whether there's a growing recognition beyond the Roma communities of the racism and disablism that you very excellently highlighted in the presentation. In other words, what allies might the current Roma self-organized groups have to push against the discrimination that you talked about?
I think that's a really good question, and I think what I was thinking about, if you're interested, that there is this book that recently came out titled Off-White, and this is sort of like tackling the issue of like race and like the concept of race and racism in Eastern Europe, and also a lot in Hungary. And this also sort of like looks into that. Maybe when I give you this example, this might answer that how this advocacy, or like what are the like situation that so for instance, like during like 2020, like during Black Lives Matter, like the main sort of frame was in Hungary that this is not something that we need to do anything about, because like race is an American concept, and or maybe like this is something even more articulated in Western Europe, and if anything, like there is no white privilege in Eastern Europe, because we have this like conceptualization of peripheral whiteness, or like dirty whiteness, that this is not the same, doesn't give the same sort of advantage as, like, I don't know, like a white person in the United States or in Western Europe and so on. And I think this already, this like peripheral or like understanding of whiteness already sort of like limits these work to expose like racialized harm that happens also not just Romani communities, but other like racialized communities, like immigrants or so on, because there's already this thing that we don't have like white privilege here. So then, but I actually I was like following some Romani advocacy group, and they take a lot of or like one group in particular, they have a really good podcast. I mean, it's in Hungarian, so I don't, but they actually take a lot of inspiration of the work of like Black liberation in the United States. Yeah, so as right now I see like these sort of like this is something is a kind of difficult position to be in Hungary, because the most majority is like resistant to admit that there is some racialization that's happening, and there is some privilege attached of being white and being non-Roma. So this is something that I think like really needs to be first addressed. Yeah.
Can I just ask a clarificatory question on that? Just from my own standpoint, this is from me. But you mention privilege being the conditional term here, and that being the thing that's argued about. I was wondering what you mean by that, or what you think a productive meaning of that might be. Because I guess the thing which is striking me over the head is, okay, well, do you necessarily need to have privilege to racialize another group? If that makes sense. Like, is it possible that an oppressed group themselves might have racist views. To me, that doesn't necessarily seem a contradiction. So I was wondering how you're using that term.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think what I was also maybe trying to highlight that I think sometimes also these understanding of like Eastern European peripheral whiteness, or like the sort of, in some way, like racialization that Eastern Europeans might experience when they immigrate to Western Europe. I guess the UK would be a great example for that with Brexit and the sort of like Polish, the image of Polish plumber, or like whatever, like this sort of I guess I can say like also like racialization that happens to immigrants. They're also sort of further drive this like anti-Roma racism back home. And then there is even a lot of, I think this is also very connected to the region of Eastern Europe, because there's so many of this like racialization and the negative stereotypes that are described around Romani communities are understood within this framework, that the reason we can never be truly Western or we can never be truly Europe is because like we have the like communities who are not able to do this like cultural or whatever norms that would need us to be more like the West. So I think this is also, and I think this is also something that I think needs to be addressed, because I think this is might be specifically why in Eastern Europe like far right has really grown after the like fall of socialism, and even after the joining of the European Union, and in with this regard like anti-Roma racism. Yeah.
That's incredibly clarifying. Thank you so much for that. That's really, really helpful. I'm going to move on to someone else's question now rather than go down the road of mine with you. You mentioned that that Romani children are overrepresented among intellectual disability diagnoses, but underrepresented amongst other disability categories such as autism and ADHD. What do you think the relation between their overrepresentation in this specific category and underrepresentation in adjacent categories might mean or represent, especially in terms of the potential political motivations or implications?
Yeah, this is something that I'm also really interested in, and this is something I would like to go beyond or do further. But this was something, even though I was like really interested in it, it was kind of like hard also to find a lot of material around this. But the way I understood it, because I read a report and I read like interviews within like special education teachers or like psychologists who work in the diagnostic center, that they already mentioned that that there is this like politics around the diagnostic category, because they sort of say that like, okay, this, so if there is like a Romani children, Roma child in the center, like they're already sort of like not thinking in terms of like much in other categories, but they already sort of think that this is going to lead to this like mild intellectual disability. And I mean, I think maybe the other part, but I think in specifically like in autism, that for to receive an autism diagnosis in Hungary, it's a really long and exhausting process, and it's also connected to, you also need to go further to not just within this education diagnostic center, but also to the like psychiatry and so on. And this is something, you know, like this is like very like an exhausting process. But this is something that I'm really interested in as well, because I read that this is not just in Hungary, but also in other countries, like racialized population are really underrepresented in under the autism spectrum. So I think this is also something that really interesting and like really important to like look into further. Yeah, also maybe it's just my personal experience, but when I was studying in Hungary, I was like we are studying to be special education teachers, that we have like sort of a specialization, that you're not just overall. And for example, I was in the specialization of working with children who like autistic children, and one of the teachers said that like ever since we have this a group who want to work with autistic children now, like sort of less people are applying to work with like intellectual disability, and sort of like, you know, there's also this like, among like hierarchy, even the teachers, like I am someone who works with like which group I'm working with. And yeah, so I think there's several things going around here, you know.
Fantastic. That's a really, really good answer. We only have time for one more question. I'm afraid it's a bit of a big one, and I'm going to have to ask you to be as brief with your answer as you can be, Anna. So one of our participants is wondering whether during the socialist period there were any significant efforts to equalize the status of Roma people in Hungary, and whether there are any lessons that such efforts could teach us, either from their failures or any successes they may have had for dealing with the neoliberal onslaught, and particularly the equation of disablement and race.
Okay. So far, so this sort of review that they did, and this like overrepresentation was, so from my understanding when I was reading the like papers and so on, that I think there was not so much effort to sort of redo this segregation, but it was actually was seen as sort of like justified. And there was even this story in a history scholarship that like the Communist Party members and special education teachers built together a special school for Romani children. So I think in this context, with this like with the racialization of Romani culture, like they were kind of even seeing that this is something like necessary for them in order to become like the perfect like socialist citizens who can then sort of contribute to the building of socialist future. So I actually, maybe this is something I should look into further to see like, okay, beyond this, were there like any efforts? But I think that actually what was interesting, that these like defectology and this like rational environmental understanding of disability, like, okay, it also had this effect very much and intertwined with racialization of disability, but because it was also so much connected to the social integration part, this like very understanding actually led to these like professionals to actually criticize this like institutionalization that was happening to disabled people in the region, because they were saying that like, this actually prevents like integration and participation. So I also think that they were like in this field, that there were something that I think just like needs, I mean, as I mentioned, like these sort of, there's this like effective politics that everything that was come from the state socialist period we need to get rid of, and we need to join to the West. So it's a little bit hard sometimes to like really see it and go back, because there is this no like real conversation around these disciplines. But I think, yeah, like look into maybe like the work, like also like, okay, outside of this racialization what happening, but also like other works of how they sort of, what efforts they were made, especially in later years, against institutionalization of disabled people, and in Eastern Europe. Yeah.
Fantastic. I mean, shameless plug from our side, but we did a presentation on disablement in the socialist world as part of the Marxism and Disability Network recently. So if yourself or anyone else who's interested wants to check that out, it should be online soon. A very final practical question. One of our participants' research lines up with yours quite closely, Anna. Is this person okay to drop you a direct message in the Zoom chat?
Course.
Perfect. And we've got another recommendation for Mel Chen's recent book, Intoxicated Race, Disability and Chemical Intimacy Across Empire. Apparently there are some good chapters in there on the racialization of Chinese, the disability classification of Chinese migrant and immigrant kids during the 19th and 20th centuries. So thank you. Those are really helpful recommendations. Thank you, Anna, for an excellent presentation. I'm getting lots of DMs from people telling me how much they enjoyed it.
Good afternoon. My name is Katie Sullivan. I have recently graduated from Vanderbilt University and am beginning a PhD in Science and Technology Studies at RPI in Troy, New York. As a visual description, I am a white femme with auburn hair currently pulled back. I'm bespectacled in houndstooth frames and wearing a white t-shirt. The title of my talk is Disability Counterinsurgent Centers, Able Nationalism, and the Administrative Apparatus. This is a very brief adaptation of a thesis that I wrote last year, but I will start with some context. So disability cultural centers are identity-based spaces that, per Elmore and colleagues, aim to develop pride in disability identity and share disability culture with the rest of campus community. An important distinction that I must make is that these are remarkably different in their aims from disability resource centers, which operate on a model of legal compliance to provide students with accommodations on the basis of a disability. Though disability cultural centers are a nascent phenomenon in higher education, the existence is predicated on decades upon decades of disability activism within and beyond the academy. So the 1990 passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act motivated a coalition of 10 disabled students at the University of Minnesota to commemorate this landmark civil rights legislation by establishing an on-campus space. There's an old snippet in the New York Times called Campus Life Minnesota, Cultural Center for the Disabled Prompts Debate. This is a piece written in 1992. An excerpt from this says that they developed the space to, quote, unite the physically handicapped and learning disabled around a shared set of experiences. So this marked the first University Disability Cultural Center. Almost 20 years later, the second DCC opened at Syracuse University, and as of October 2024, more than 20 centers of this sort have been established across the United States. Well, at least a dozen are in the process of laying the groundwork to open. Santa Rosa Junior College is the first community college to open a disability cultural center, bringing these centers beyond the realm of four-year public and private universities, and a community-based disability cultural center will be physically opening this summer in San Francisco, though they've been doing online programming for a bit now. In their dissertation, Liz Thompson explained that disabled student activists and their allies have been the driving force for the creation of DCCs, and that, to date, there's not been a DCC that an institution has initiated before student advocacy demanded one. The scholarly body of work regarding disability cultural centers is in its current instantiation extremely limited, which is to say that there are 2 academic articles and 4 doctoral dissertations on the matter. While these 6 works on disability cultural centers are indeed important, they don't necessarily engage with how DCCs function in tandem with their administrative apparatuses. Rather, each of these studies concludes that DCCs are necessary and beneficial resources that promote disability identity development and a sense of belonging on college campuses. This isn't to say that DCCs don't accomplish these things, but each of these studies takes disability culture, identity, and inclusion as self-evident goods without any sort of substantive engagement with their critiques. This, I believe, has produced incomplete conclusions about the role that DCCs have served across U.S. universities. Rather than unquestioningly framing the DCC as an exceptional or eminently radical site within an ableist university, my thesis recognizes that participating in or fostering disability culture is not automatically synonymous with practicing disability justice or anti-ableism. As such, I work to relocate the DCC as part of the university, one that is often subsumed into the administrative apparatus that maintains much of the same ableism that occurs on the broader campus. In its most distilled form, this thesis poses a question about disability inclusion in higher education, but this is not necessarily a question about how to make academia more inclusive for disabled students. Rather, it asks what that inclusion entails and who that inclusion serves. 2 major questions animate this thesis. One being, what are disabled students doing to reclaim and remake institutional space? The second being, what compromises belie the promise of a safe space within the neoliberal university? There are a lot of authors and ideas that have made my argument possible that I'm thinking through and with. The major ones that have helped me build out the theoretical framework and approach for this are Snyder and Mitchell's work in cultural locations, and obviously their writing on able nationalism. Jay Dolmage in 2017 wrote Academic Ableism. Ryan Fritsch, their work on cryptechnoscience has helped me think through how disabled people hack and tinker with infrastructure and the sort of frictional practices of creating access. And then Puar's 2017 work on crypt nationalism. I cite The Right to Name extensively. I think the bulk of this work is certainly I owe to her. But to contextualize this a bit more, the US disability rights and independent living movements are often associated with physical disability and are shaped by the distinct cultures and rehabilitation efforts that surround disabled World War II veterans and post-polio communities in the US. These movements and the historiography of these movements, it's overwhelmingly white and typically deals with disability as though it's a single issue category, uninflected by other social locations like race, ethnicity, class, gender, and sexuality. In The Right to Name, Poir explains, quote, "The category of disability is instrumentalized by state discourses of inclusion, not only to obscure forms of debility, but also to actually produce debility and sustain its proliferation. Disability is bound up in imperialist and eugenic violences. Failing to engage with this truth is to align with what McClure calls crypt nationalism, that is to say, a practice in which certain disabled bodies are designated as good or upstanding citizens." Poir engages this to say that US disability rights has done less to incorporate people with disabilities into labor pools and more to cultivate a privileged class of disabled citizens. Further, she writes, "US capitalist imperialism is the generator of much of the world's disability, yet contributes unruly source material for rights discourses that propagate visibility, empowerment, identification, and pride. Much of this debilitation is caused by the exploitative capital and imperial structures of the global north. Claiming empowered disability identity as a site of creative embodiment and resistance is perhaps more tenable when disability is perceived or felt as the result of an unfortunate accident or a misfortune, or as an exceptional circumstance for which the body impacted is in no way to blame. Disability culture is innovative and vibrant and has produced methods for intervening in ableist and inaccessible environments, but it is also non-innocent. In terms of my methods, I conducted oral history interviews with 10 people that have some relationship to disability and to disability cultural centers. My study sample represents 8 different US universities and includes both current and former DCC directors, students who wrote proposals and negotiated with administrators to create disability cultural centers, student employees, and those who are leading in-progress initiatives to establish such centers. I used a reflexive thematic analysis and identified 13 sub-themes, which I organized into 4 primary themes, which I'll go into at length. These are cultural dislocation, coalition, community and knowledge building, the administrative apparatus, and geographies of identity and access on campus. As an access consideration, I let my participants choose whether to type their reflections asynchronously and submit them to me, or to participate in a recorded Zoom interview. 7 participants did the Zoom option, while 3 submitted narratives through a form. My interviews ranged from 45 minutes to just over 3 hours, and all interviews were transcribed verbatim for coding. After familiarizing myself with my data, I generated my initial codes based on patterns that I was noticing, sorting data into those themes, and then condensing them into the broader primary themes that I ended up using in what I'm presenting to you now. The selected themes tell a story about the experiences of disabled students on ableist and inaccessible campuses, how they attempt to intervene in ableist environments or reclaim institutional space through proposing DCCs, and how these efforts are ultimately received and enacted. I find that oral histories are a useful narrative technology. My data is full of ambivalence and friction, which is consistent with the way that disability culture exists. A search for reprieve, for reorientation, and for disability community upon entering higher education is a nearly universal element in all of my participant stories. My first theme, cultural dislocation, or the university as dislocation, speaks to how the university naturalizes disability exclusion, following its legacies of eugenic violence against disabled people. Though some disabled students now attend university, it remains a hostile location in many respects. I will read 2 excerpts from participant interviews. My first one reads, "The campus itself is incredibly inaccessible. Its nickname is the Hilltop, with lots of hills and old buildings. Requests to make certain buildings accessible are often denied due to the fact that buildings are historic and a lot of the infrastructure is falling apart." A second interviewee said, "There is so much burden on me as a student to do a lot of advocating. There's just so much self-advocacy that's required of disabled students at my university. That's like its own 3-credit class, advocating for myself. So it was very exhausting and scary a lot of the times because of the power difference between student and the professor." This desire for community prompted several of my interviewees to build coalitions and begin the process of preparing a proposal for funding and space to create a formal site of disability culture on campus. Sarah Ahmed speaks to the function of diversity work in universities, offering a reminder that, quote, "It is through the effort to transform institutions that we generate knowledge about them." Participants remarked on the processes of developing institutional knowledge, building coalitions, and sharing resources while in pursuit of addressing inaccessibility and ableism on their respective campuses. A lot of this knowledge making in the process of negotiating for a DCC happens through student government involvement. The disabled students forge relationships and friendships with each other in the process of bringing forth the DCC. And once that DCC is established, it becomes a resource for disabled students to gather and share knowledge and be in community with one another. A striking quote from one of my participants says, "Almost anything that happens in a disability cultural center is not happening in isolation." Another participant remarked, "At the end of the 2021 to 2022 school year, I was really struggling with my own health. I had, in that year, lost the ability to walk across campus without pain. So I was looking into using mobility aids for the first time, and I was really grateful just to have a community of students that I could talk to and be like, hey, what do folks know about accessible transit on campus? What do folks know about accommodations in the dorms? You know, all of this stuff." Once students' proposals get approved, however, DCCs tend to become increasingly abstracted from their visions. Participants reflected on the compromises that they'd been forced to make in order to receive space and funding, dealing with respectability politics, administrative tactics to neutralize or depoliticize DCC efforts, and the misappropriation of disability justice principles. One participant noted that their university's DCC is operating in a way that disabled student activists had not initially envisioned because of its affiliation with disability services on campus. They said, "A lot of students I've spoken to have said that they don't want to come to the center because it's in the Disability Resource Center. And some students have had such horrible experiences there that they feel uncomfortable and not welcome." They also explained, "The DCC funding comes from the Disability Resource Center, and the professional staff member that we hired, their boss is the director of the Disability Resource Center. So we're very much under the Disability Resource Center, and a lot of decisions are under their purview. We don't have much say in exactly the type of center that we want to be." A student at another university told me, "Disability is inherently political, and I think there are some really important and pertinent political issues that disability cultural centers can and should highlight. I'm a strong believer that we can't call ourselves disability activists unless we're advocating for collective liberation, and the director of my disability cultural center disagrees. I would love to see the DCC model being one that engages with the issues that are affecting disabled people the most, both locally, nationally, and globally. You can't have a proper DCC unless you fully integrate disability justice principles." Another participant who served as a student worker in a DCC described it as a cutthroat work environment. Further, they told me that the way that the student staff are supervised is probably the biggest way the DCC is clashing with disability justice values in really significant and detrimental ways. The student staff are not being accommodated, and it's not a really accessible place to work. The DCC then can operate as yet another arm of the administrative apparatus while advertising itself as an inclusive space for disabled students. This is consistent with the troubles of the US disability rights movement. White, palatable, disabled people are brought into the fold of the university or celebrated at the expense of multiply marginalized disabled people. As discussed at length, disability is spatially mediated. Participation in disability culture and identity-based spaces on college campuses is too contingent on university geographies and resources. Participants reflected on shared identity spaces, collaborative cross-identity programming, and the ways in which various inaccessible or accessible conditions shaped their experiences with and opinions on the DCC. One participant told me, "I think it's beneficial to have the DCC with other identity-based centers. That's super important. A lot of disabled students don't know that it exists because of this, and the only reason that I kind of found this space is because I explicitly looked for it." Another student said to me, "I think that because our director is a white person, there hasn't been much outreach as I would have personally liked to see to the Multicultural Center and to students of color around the Disability Cultural Center." Another anecdote with regard to spatial resources, quote, "There was a huge conversation about how the DCC was a tiny conference room, so we were thinking about how to have many people with mobility aids in the space and also be able to walk around the space. And at one point, someone who wasn't a mobility aid user in the coalition insisted that folks should leave their mobility aids outside of the space and then walk in so that they wouldn't take up too much room. She wanted us to have a mobility aid parking lot in the hallway outside of the DCC, and then a lot of folks were like, no, we shouldn't, we should be able to be in our mobility aids in the space." While DCCs have served as a meaningful site of community for some, they perpetuate white supremacy in the same way that historical U.S. disability rights movements have. And while DCCs can be a reprieve from on-campus inaccessibility and ableism, they can also be harmful and unaccommodating work environments for the student employees that run them. While DCCs may be proposed by students with radical or anti-assimilationist disability politics, these established centers are often subsumed in student affairs and neutralized. One participant described the very conclusion that I came to while conducting interviews. They said, "I don't want to call the DCC a disabled utopia space, because it's not. The DCC is inherently existing within the university, and they have to in order to get funded. I don't think that we should get rid of them. The function of them is to support the university, however. I think it's important to reckon with that." Another shared a similar reflection. Quote, "If we stop trying to cater to the university's expectations, I think it might put us in a more precarious situation in terms of the actual center, but I feel like that's maybe worth it to me. For the integrity of this work, I think the way forward is to really reevaluate what our goals are and what our values are." These reflections acknowledge that the Disability Cultural Center, as a part of the administrative apparatus, recreates exclusion by embodying the same university values that occlude many disabled people from the academy to begin with. I don't have a concrete answer for what comes next, but I do know that this begins with asking questions and starting to complicate our preconceived notions or ideas about disability pride and culture as benign or positive forces. Thank you.